Well, just to reiterate, welcome everybody from Evolve a Learning Lab. It's such a pleasure to be hosting Daniel Ryan, who is going to give us 6 weeks of very interesting learning about regression therapy and the huge and so many places that can go. Tonight, his first guest with us is Melissa Tiers. She is the author of Integrative Hypnosis, a comprehensive course in change. And the title of tonight's session is Hypnosis, Regression Therapy, and Other Tools of the Mind. So without further ado, I'm just going to pass it over to Daniel. And please feel free, everybody, to communicate with me in the chat box if there's anything that you missed and you particularly want to know what that was, say a book that either of them mentioned or a source or a website, just let me know. And also feel free to send your questions in throughout the hour. And then I'll be back at 9. And I encourage you all to come on the screen and video to talk with Daniel and Melissa. But if you don't feel like it or you can't for technical reasons, I'm happy to field your question. So I'll see you back at 9. And thanks so much. Look forward to hearing you guys. Great.
Thank you very much, Henrietta, and thank you, Faye. Well, welcome everyone. Hello, it's lovely to be here. My name is Daniel Ryan. I am a hypnotherapist and regression therapist, as was mentioned. Welcome to Healing Across Lifetimes. We have a wonderful program put together with a really amazing selection of guests that I'm honored and really, really excited to be speaking with. To introduce myself a little bit more, I've been a hypnotherapist and regression therapist now in full-time private practice for about 5 years here at the Center for Integrative Hypnosis in New York City, which was founded by Melissa, the guest we'll be speaking with tonight, and my dear friend and teacher, Melissa, as well. And yeah, hypnosis and regression therapy are the family business in my case. I grew up with them. My father was a regression therapist and a hypnotherapist, and my first and most influential teacher. And when I was about 13 or 14 years old enough to actually ask my dad what he did for a living and understand his response, at the time, he was the president of the association, the International Association for Regression Research and Therapies. And as a 13, 14-year-old, I would go with him to workshops that he would lead around the Northeast, and experienced as a young person around 13, 14 years old, meditation, past life regression, hypnosis, and exploration in the subconscious mind in this fashion at a very early age, and really became very comfortable with them at an early age and experienced as a young guy the benefits that can come through these practices around that time in my life, long before I ever knew that I would do it for a living. In fact, my father's advice was always kind of self-deprecating. He would say, don't follow in my footsteps and things like this. And I took him at his word early on. I kept with it though, because I really gravitated towards it so naturally. I loved it dearly. It was, not only was I attracted to the work, but it was also an opportunity to hang out with my dad, and really was the starting point for me is in that. It's in that relationship with my father that I had, which of course is very dear to me still. And to tell you a quick story about one of the first regressions I ever experienced. It was a workshop on a Sunday afternoon sometime in the early to mid 90s in the back of a New Age bookstore somewhere around Princeton, New Jersey, where my father was leading a group regression of about 14 to 15 people. And this was a day-long experience that was going to last 4 to 5 hours. And during this time, as a 13, 14-year-old guy, I experienced what may or may not have been a past lifetime memory as a woman on the Great Plains of the United States during expansion into the West. I had a husband who looked something like a caricature of the Monopoly Man, kind of rich banker who was twisting his mustache and very clearly nefarious. And he left me high and dry with our 4 or 5 children. I saw, a covered wagon and a caravan and dust and the Grand Canyon and things like this. And I saw myself pass away in that lifetime as this woman doing dishes just kind of collapsed in the middle of a kitchen. And I had this experience at 13, 14 years old, and remember speaking to my father about it in the car ride home afterwards. And he helped me interpret what came through in this narrative that had risen seemingly fully formed out of my subconscious mind, my 14-year-old male subconscious mind, and pieced together a story about the sibling rivalry that I was experiencing at the time, actually, with my brother. My parents had recently separated at the time, and home was a complicated place, and I was embroiled in a bitter sibling rivalry with my brother at home. And there were these messages about control and power, essentially. And as this woman in the Great Plains of the United States, I had given all of my power over to this husband who was controlling me through his money and X, Y, and Z. And when all of that was taken away, I had no way to take care of my children any longer. I don't know what happened to them, and I passed away. And these dynamics were certainly at play at home and in my life at the time. And I was able to glean from this experience that may or may not have been a memory of a past lifetime, wisdom, lessons that I could apply to my relationships in the present, my relationship with my brother, my relationship with my family, what I was going to do with it, the decisions that I would make with my power and my control as a young person. So it also became clear to me at a young age that not only was this tool of the mind truly fascinating, but that, okay, maybe these are past lifetime memories we're exploring, but it's also very clear that these are metaphors for dominant themes in the way we experience them in the present, whether it's relationships, joys, challenges, pains, phobias, addictions, etc., etc. And there's a great deal that we can learn from these metaphors, and examining them from this expansive, integrative point of view, seeing them in this way, these narratives can grow and change as we do. And this is my point of view as a practitioner. This is also the point of view of this series. I tell all of my clients, as I tell my students, as I tell you, it is not my role to tell anyone what is or is not real, nor do I consider it my role to say this is or is not a past lifetime memory. I really leave that to you to decide for yourself what your experience is, and I defer to you as the expert on you. It is clear to me as a practitioner, and also as someone who has experienced many past life regressions, that the experience itself can be most useful when we do not place it in a box. We don't have to. There's no obligation to decide that the experience is definitely a past lifetime, or definitely a book I read once, or a combination of a movie or a TV show, or half a dream with half a memory, or something like this. But if we instead allow the experiences to live and breathe and just be whatever story they may be, then they can continue to change and grow as we do, and we can continue to learn from them as time goes by. This experience I had briefly in the consciousness of a woman on the Great Plains of the United States centuries ago, which happened for me over 20 years ago now, I continue to learn from today. So if we approach it with this open frame, I find the experiences to be most useful and to have the most potential, the most possibility in them. So as we discuss that today, we are also talking about we're also talking about hypnosis. We're also talking about states. We're also talking about trance. It is very important, if not crucial, in examining regression therapy and past life regression, to also have a sound understanding of, if not hypnosis, various states and how to guide a client to and from safe to safe, relaxed to relaxed. All of the things that can happen in past life regression, the unpredictable nature of the experience. A wise and experienced practitioner is imperative. So as we approach this subject today, I was also very excited to have Melissa as our first guest. contributing to this idea that, in order to understand past life regression and regression therapy, we need to begin by understanding what's happening in hypnosis, what's happening in trance, what's happening in suggestibility, and indeed what's happening in the brain, and have a kind of foundational understanding upon which to build with each successive session of this series, and also just our knowledge base in past life regression. Melissa is, hello. I want to get certain things right here, so I'm going to read just a little bit. Melissa is a 2-time recipient of the Medical and Dental Association's Pen and Quill Award for her books, Integrative Hypnosis and Keeping the Brain in Mind, both wonderful books, which I've read multiple times, which are excellent. In 2014, she won the National Guild of Hypnotists President's Award. And in 2014, she won the Speaker and Author of the Year Award from the Zurich Hypnosis Congress. Melissa, again, is my teacher and my friend. And to say on a personal note, I first met and trained with Melissa in 2012. And I mentioned earlier that my father is the first and most influential teacher I've ever had in my career. Melissa is the second. When I trained with her, everything that I had been taught up to that point was kind of blown apart in the most beautiful way, expanded and put back together again with this far more robust understanding now of not only what was happening in regression, but what could happen in the brain, what was happening in trance, what was happening in hypnosis, and what had begun as a seed was turning into a garden. And it just sent me off in so many different directions. In conjunction with this, Melissa has, over time, created what is certainly the most robust and interesting community of hypnotists in New York City, and might be that in the Northeastern United States, might be that in the East Coast, might be that in the US. And I don't know if she intended to create that community. That's one of the questions that I intend to ask her tonight, but it certainly has happened. And as a practitioner, I feel that the field owes her a debt. I feel that we do. I feel that her service is nothing short of incredible. I can't know how many practitioners have been supported by what she has created. If you are in the New York City area, please do come visit us at the Center for Integrative Hypnosis, which Melissa founded in 2013, which is the hub and where she offers a practice night on Wednesday nights. She has a few trainings coming up, which we will be sure to mention before we are done tonight. And without further ado, I would like to introduce to you Melissa Tiers.
Wow, Dan, that was a pretty fantastic intro. Thank you. Did I intend to create a community? When I started teaching, and I actually, although the space that you and I both work in, the center on 29th Street, is 4 years old, 3-4 years old. I was on Fifth Avenue for a good 12 years prior to that. It's funny how the community kind of changes throughout the years. Every few years, it's almost a turnover as people go on and move and expand into their full-time practice. And when I first started teaching, my husband said, "You're just doing this so you have people to talk to about this crazy shit." And I said, "Yep." At the time I was exploring all of this stuff. I was fascinated with all consciousness research, and really I can go back to being fascinated by that and metaphysics and things from, at 14, 15. So like you, at a very young age, I was fascinated with altered states of consciousness and the different ways of getting there. And, I always joke that I know this is the Evolver series, and I get their emails, so I know that they're cool with this. If it wasn't for the early hallucinogenic experiences where I saw just how malleable reality is. You know, our perception of reality is our reality. And when that can change so drastically, you really have to start to question what is reality. And that question is, you know, has guided me, I think, my whole life. I was chatting with a couple of members of my family this weekend. We were talking about, you know, some incidents when we were young, and the fact that even at age 5, you know, I was, you know, spinning and hyperventilating to create altered states because I used to just love to get dizzy and you know, and be in that space. And, you know, my fear of death has been a guiding force. It was my need to understand what happened when we die. And that really led me into all of this weird consciousness research, from as I got older, going to the Monroe Institute to synchronize my brain and try and, you know, control brainwave states and get insight that way, have direct experience of altered states to explore. And then I always joke that at a certain point, you know, I got tired of just messing with my own mind and started messing with others, and you know, just for more data and for more experience. And so to me, you know, the mind field in general is the most fascinating thing we can even think about. And so hypnosis is a fantastic way to explore all those altered states. But I would have to say, I certainly meant to build a group that we can, you know, talk about this stuff and explore this stuff. You know, I have my biweekly practice nights for all my students, so that not only so that they have a place to land, to get supervision, and, you know, to say, hey, I've got this client who has this, you know, these panic attacks and la la la, what would you do? So not only for me to support them, but honestly, it's a two-way, it's a feedback loop. You know, I am always learning. Every conversation we have where, you know, you even come and say, okay, so what do you think of this? You know, every question makes me think a little more and refine some ideas. And I think you said something earlier that is really quite brilliant and difficult for most people, in that you have this frame of maybe it's real, maybe it's not. This, you know, you seem to be very comfortable in uncertainty, which is one of the things I've been saying for many years, that our job is to help our clients, you know, make friends with uncertainty, because we live in an uncertain world, and it is, you know, something that the brain cannot stand, to be uncertain. We will create narratives. The brain, I read this great quote, and I forget where they said the brain is the bard. And it really just weaves these tales. It tries to make sense of everything. And so one of the things early on that really impressed me about you, coming from where you came from with your father, and, you know, kind of inundated in the more traditional, you know, past life regression as this thing, this is what it is, this is the way to do it, that you were so open, that you were truly a philosopher of the mind. And I think that has given you a wider perspective, where you're more open to doing things differently, to being able to sit as that kind of almost stable presence with your clients as they kind of fluctuate in this uncertainty. And I think just having your, you know, your conviction in either way, as our friend John would say, either way is better, you know, because I do struggle even though, we've had many conversations, and, I am a skeptic at heart. I, for those of you that don't know my work, it's usually a little brain-based and very, rooted in science. And so when I teach a course, sometimes when I teach, I taught a class called The Atheist Guide to Past Life Regression.
Which was excellent. So,
and, it's really about how can we use this metaphorically, but truth be told, it was more like the agnostics guide to past life regression, because the truth is that is more true for me, in that, I don't know, but I am not as comfortable in this uncertainty as you are, which is kind of inspiring to me. I still do want to know, I still am that same kid looking for proof, I want to know.
I'm there too. Yeah.
And at this point, even though, like you, I set a frame for my clients that regardless of what this is, the unconscious mind is metaphoric. It's symbolic. We create narratives to explore many different states, and that once we create a metaphor, healing happens, because the brain really does map metaphor over to experience, as you and I know when we deal with pain management. And one of my specialties is anxieties of all different types. And so as soon as you can leap into metaphor, you can then start doing the work within the metaphor, and it translates to the experience of less anxiety, or removing a phobia, or things like that. So knowing the power of metaphor is I think key here, because I've had many, in my certification training, I include past life regression, because, once people hear that you're a hypnotist, there's a few things that they ask for. Right? Can you help me quit smoking, or stop doing this, or start doing this? Right? So there's habits that they want to either make or break. And then the other thing is, do you do past life regression? And the truth is, my first visit to a hypnotherapist was after reading Brian Weiss's book, Many Lives, Many Masters. And I think we talked about this, that, it was not such a good experience for me, but it just shows that this is what fascinated me. And then for many years, while I was building a very clinical, professional, evidence-based practice, because I was training doctors and nurses, and I was teaching at Beth Israel, and something about putting past life regression up on my website just seemed too fucking woo-woo for any of that. And still my practice is, 85% referral by psychiatrists and stuff. So it's only been in the past few years that I've, kind of gotten back into it. Or rather, that's not true, that I've come out of the closet, because I would do it in the privacy of my classroom with my students, and I would do it with my clients and explore. But there was this kind of thing about me collecting data, wanting to know. And I will say that sometimes the past life regressions in a group, and you and I have led a couple of groups where they had some trippy, crazy experiences that were so clearly metaphorical. I was a flame, or I was a mermaid, or I was, but what can we explore? How is that relevant for your life today? And so part of me, likes the idea that this could be magic. This could be it. This could be amazing if it were real. And I have had many experiences, and as a clinician, as well as someone experiencing strange things, where I do suspect that there I certainly believe now more than any other time in my life in reincarnation. Now, the question is, how easy is it to access? Right?
Yes.
So that's my personal belief when I'm in my believing moods. As you know, and we've talked about my, atheist set point, that it seems that I'll have an experience and it'll spike it. And then after a while, I'll start to figure out how I can rationalize. We don't know that much about different regions of the brain, and it could be a neural firing, and it could just be metaphor and narrative my brain is making up. But then there's that moment again, and I believe. So I love this stuff, and I think that when you start to understand the brain and memory and how reconsolidation of memory works and how malleable memory is, we still in this culture, they say it used to take 50 years for what's happening in the laboratory, in research labs, to trickle down into popular awareness and consciousness. Well, that was before the internet, right? So I'm hoping that, pretty soon people are going to understand that memory doesn't work the way that we've always thought it did. It's not this recorder that we can just press rewind. Every memory is an active synthetic process. It's a recreation from different regions of the brain, and it's never devoid of your experience of now, as well as all the experience that has come between the memory and now. And this is proven, but people don't grasp that because it's not an easy narrative. Once again, we don't like the uncertainty.
It's not a common narrative either. Yeah. Yeah. Pardon me for interrupting. I just want to, it's not a common narrative either. I think that it's lacking socially a common understanding of how memory works. My father, again, talking about him being one of my earliest teachers, he would use the metaphor of the recorder for the subconscious mind, which I think was easy enough for everybody to grasp. But again, it took me years to get around to realize that's not a really very good metaphor. That's actually a pretty flawed metaphor, and that
it's flawed in that it doesn't take into account perspective, filtering systems, unconscious biases, heuristics, shortcuts that the brain makes. And on some level, we are being bombarded by millions of bits of information every given moment that does go primarily into the unconscious awareness. And that's why priming is such a powerful thing. And the fact that we can be conscious, in the latest research says, although we're being bombarded by millions of bits of information every given moment, we can be conscious of 40. So all of that does go in, but it's not a passive experience. In the same way that I'm looking at, your beautiful face on this screen, and any person would think for a moment as I look around my room that this is reality and I'm just passively recording this like a camera lens, when the truth is we're creating it, we're making it up every moment. The only thing my eyes are getting is, vibrations and photons of light. And that gets bounced back to different regions in the brain, and it's flipped upside down, and it's then recreated from all these different parts, and then it's flipped in front, and we have this idea that we're seeing. So when you start to realize that's the same for hearing, it's that nothing is this passive recording. It's an active process. And so when we do things like regression, and specifically for this series, past life regression, you cannot separate the filtering system of the individual and, in truth, the filtering system of the practitioner. Because someone in a trance state is not only is hypnosis a state of heightened suggestibility, but it is an amplifier. So if one leading word, one inflection can be detected on many levels, so that you can create an experience very, very easily by just one or two words. You can lead people to have false memories. And we know all this. And so, to be able to sit with the frame that you have, which is a little more open and aware, and to set the tone by saying, let's have this experience and we'll see what comes, is really a kind of safe space for people. When a practitioner has a belief that this is real, I'm taking you to a past life, this is what it is, that conviction and congruency on their part, where they unconsciously and consciously believe it, also translates. So the person there will have this experience that they believe totally is a past life experience. And I'm not saying there's not benefit to that. As you and I both have had, wacky, great experiences. I think to broaden this out, though, to kind of step into the new era, allows us to be even more creative. You and I have talked about all different creative approaches that really do springboard off of all the great work that's come before us, but it allows us the freedom to create new interventions and cooler things. Novelty for the brain, and understanding how the brain works helps us to do that. Understanding how we can widen out or funnel in consciousness. We can go inductive or deductive, and there's language that promotes that. There's language that promotes different states and an openness to the metaphor that I think is very freeing. Very freeing. And in our being able to also be open to all possibilities. So I love thinking about this in many different ways. I just read an article today on epigenetics, and how they've, this article was saying how they've actually found the RNA molecule that explains how your ancestors, your parents, traumatic experiences translates through, genetically speaking, to the next generation.
Wow.
And there's been some research that hints at that. Well, now they've found the mechanism with which it happens, so that basically we pass down the memory of trauma to better prepare our children to come out ready to, you know what I mean? Like, either to come out ready to fight or to be slightly desensitized to it.
Yeah.
But what they're looking at is when they thought maybe epigenetics petered out, but really what they're finding is, if the next generation is not as under threat as the Holocaust victims, then the next generation after that will not show that mutation. So it's kind of interesting when you think about it. I recently had someone do an Akashic Records consultation, which was very interesting. Which is, Edgar Cayce used to go into a very deep hypnotic state and access the Akashic Records, the kind of book of life of your soul. So if we're talking about soul as a consciousness that either, right, one theory is we live many lives, right? We're growing, developing. One theory is there is no time, and so all time is now, and so all these lives are happening now. And I love taking all these different ideas and playing with them. So you and I talked about this intervention that I kind of created, where it is the wheel of life, and that you can kind of be in the hub and access all lives at once, and a hologram even. So taking in all these different little bits and developing different past life experiences can be really cool. So then we've got what this guy said, which was that the last, what did he said the last handful, 10 lives are actually stored not in the Akashic records, but in the DNA. And it was the first time I had heard that idea. And then I started to see all these different, we know about our cognitive filters, and we have such a limited ability to hold in working memory any decent amount of information. 7 plus or minus 2, right, is the limit we can hold in conscious mind. And so our filters are pretty, strong. And as soon as I hear a bit of information, it opens me up to what I might see, hence the article today, as well as a Facebook post that was saying, look at celebrities and their past lives. And I'm telling you, Google this, people, celebrities and their past lives, because you're going to come up with all these old paintings and photos that are absolutely identical to people we know today. And what started happening, I heard that, then I saw that, and I'm like, oh my God, that is John Travolta's face on that Civil War soldier. I mean, like, it's insane. Just trust me. Then I went to a museum, and I swear to God, every face I looked at in all those paintings, I'm like, this is so weird. Do we just recycle the same features, or is this an interesting thing to explore? So, I like those different ideas that allow me to play, because it's fun and it's fascinating, and we don't know, right? We don't know. And even though I would say 98% of the time I'm pretty skeptical, and I think mostly it's metaphors of mind, which is still quite useful, as you and I know, and symbolic of what's happening in our life and what we need to explore. There's that part of me that still gets really jazzed and excited when people have a past life experience that feels absolutely vital and real. And I mean, think about what that does as a practitioner. I mean, you do it all the time because it's what you're one of your specialties. But when I see someone absolutely transformed, knowing that I grew up with a hardcore Woody Allen fear of death, like, at 4, I was obsessed with it. To me, to be able to watch someone have this experience that transforms them, transforms them.
Yeah.
Because if you don't fear death, then what does that do for your life? How do you then live your life if you really believe that we have been here 10,000, 20,000 times before, and you're here to learn a lesson? And then, so to me, even though you and I talk a lot about what it could be, what it couldn't be, the malleability of mind and metaphor, and, there still is this openness, this open question. What if it's real, And I love that. So unlike you, I'm still like driving to land on one side or the other. It's, I have to get more comfortable in that not knowing state, but it's just my nature to keep asking.
Oh, of course.
Nudging the universe.
Yeah. I'd love to speak to that for a moment. This question, this fundamental question of, is it real? One of my favorite questions with past life regression is always, but am I making it up? What if I'm making it up?
Yeah.
And my response to that is always, of course you're making it up. You're clearly making it up. It's coming from you. But what part of you is making it up? What value is it? Yes, you're clearly making it up. So again, this question of, is it real? Well, is the feeling of the experience real? The state that you experienced in your body, the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions that went through you as you were having the experience, was that not real? And as you said before, how crucial the frame of the practitioner is. If I then say, well, yes, there's definitely past lifetimes, and what you experienced is X, Y, and Z, and this is what's going to happen when you die, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then I'm superimposing a kind of belief system that may or may not be helpful to that person in their processing of whatever the experience was.
Well, certainly at where they are. And, you know, when people say, is it real? I say, I don't know. You know, how can I know? I can tell you that I've seen and heard things that are pretty impressive, and I'm hard pressed to explain away. And then I'll tell you that certain times it is clearly a metaphor the clients and I can explore, and we know that, but I don't know. And how cool is that? But when you say, yes, you're making it up. Of course you're making it up. You're making everything up. But who's the you that's making it up?
Right.
Then, you know, then you're speaking to something bigger, right? So as we talked about, we're making this all up. You know, one of my catchphrases about hypnosis and NLP and all of this stuff in general is, you know, this shit is all made up, right?
I'm going to print you a t-shirt someday.
Someday. But, you know, I like that, that there is this, people have transformative experiences, whether we can say it's real or not, it feels real to the individual, and that's what matters. And, you know, if every time they think of this past horrible incident that happened 20 years ago, and yet they think of it and they can feel the same anxiety, and their heart rate goes up and their body responds as if they're in it now. Is it real or is it made up? So we're making it up all the time. I mean, wherever we choose to point that flashlight in this huge dark room is where we are putting our attention. And we're constantly, your high CPU usage is affecting the screen. I just got some weird technical alarm. Hold on.
Take your time.
What does CPU mean? What is that?
That means your central processing unit, your computer, essentially.
Is what? Okay. So I'm just going to shut some things down.
Take your time. You're still coming in okay.
All right. So I'll just leave it alone until I'm sure if I disappeared, you can more than field the questions.
Yeah, we'll know what happened. I saw a question from Ben on the chat here. Hey, Ben,
I haven't even checked the chat. Sorry. Wow.
I just wanted to defer to Ben's question. We're not going to be doing a regression or a demo of a past life regression tonight. Melissa and I are just going to continue talking and fielding questions tonight. And the series is going to continue in that fashion until the last session, where I will be leading a past life regression for the group, which I will offer instructions and suggestions for at that time. But if people would like demos and things like that down the road, we can certainly be talking about that. I am open to that. But tonight we're going to continue just to have a conversation.
Dan and I have led some workshops where we kind of do a double induction, and we play with different ideas and lead groups that are always a lot of fun. So that last one is going to be a treat if you want to experience that.
There's another question from Ben here, actually, that I'll pose to you, Melissa. He asks us, have either of you ever encountered ETs when doing past life regressions with clients? Have you?
No. I've had people who were worried about it. I've had people come in with a pre-frame of, I think I might have been abducted, and those are the people that I actually will not do past life regression with, and those are the people that I will say, well, how do you know, and how is it affecting you today? Like, how is this a problem? Because then they're going to say, well, I have trust issues, or I have, every time I'm laying in bed, I have this anxiety, and we go right to fixing that. Because the truth is, if you go in with this idea, you will have the experience you are expecting. Hypnosis, as Ben, as you know, you've taken my training, people are highly suggestible, and not just to the practitioner. I've had debates on different types of regression therapy, not necessarily past life regression, but regression to cause in this type of therapy is very big in the field. And they'll say, well, you won't get false memories if you are very clean in your language, so that you don't use any leading language. And I say, you're forgetting the other half of the fucking equation, which is the person's internal suspicions, expectations, snippets of stories, TV shows.
Mm-hmm.
So when somebody calls me and they suspect something in their past, or something like ET, I won't. I've had students who, when doing a past life regression, did have something like that show up. I had one person, I remember many, many years ago, where a ghost showed up, and they were, you really have to think on your feet. This speaks to your point of being a well-trained hypnotist, because you've got to work within the metaphor. I had this girl, imagine drawing elaborate circles of protection, because she was convinced there was the evil spirit. And, I had to jump into her world and do what needed to be done, in the same way that I've gone through a ritual of de-hexing someone who was convinced they were hexed many years ago. So we are dealing with the metaphors of mind, and the belief system is the driving force. So although I haven't had that particular thing, I really do, I drop a red flag whenever I hear something that I think is going to lead it. Now, if somebody comes in and they say to me, well, I have this problem and a psychic told me it came from one of my past lives, well, then of course I'm going to go directly to that past life and fix it. Why? Because they've got a belief that that's where it happened, which means I'm not going to fight them on that. I'm going to work with that belief system. We go into a past life, we heal, we forgive, we learn what we can learn, and then their phobia is gone. So, belief is definitely the driving force. And, that is where you want to be well skilled for what comes up. I had someone who just in trance, when I was talking about, we were exploring. We always explore things like, what was the positive intention of this symptom, of this habit? Let's find out what the unconscious mind was trying to do, because it's almost always a positive intention underneath even all the bad habits, where people spontaneously went into a past life, and a past life abreaction, having a negative experience. And so you really have to be clear on how to, the first thing I teach in my classes is how to dissociate, right? I'm going to tap you on your hand. You're floating above the scene. As a matter of fact, most of my past life regression techniques all start from a place of dissociation, because I'm overly cautious. And maybe it's an old thing of mine and my fear of death and things like that. But, I've had a couple of encounters early on where people spontaneously went into bad, negative states, death scenes and stuff, that I just wouldn't ever want someone to kind of experience that from in it. I'd rather them look down on it and say, oh, there I am, a soldier being killed on the field from a dissociated position. That's okay. We can get what we need to get. But from in that position, I don't need that in my office. That's crazy. I'm not a fan of it. I don't like it. Speaking of which, I heard that someone was in your office having quite the experience not that long ago. So I know I went off on a tangent here.
Quite all right.
It really is about belief and expectation, and how to manage that, and how to be clear. And, when people, it's not to say that when people come to me and say, I don't know what this is. Somebody said, maybe it's from a past life. I love that kind of stuff. I'll go there and explore, even though their belief is guiding them there. I'll use that. But if I believe their belief is going to guide them to have a horrible abduction experience with an extraterrestrial, I'm not fucking going there. You know, it's like, what purpose is that going to serve except to reconfirm that you're a victim and can be victimized at any given moment at night? You know, that to me is spooky shit. But, you know, I guess some people could definitely argue with that and say that it could be healing. It could be any, you know, you could work with that and forgive the ETs or whatever. But I don't.
Yeah. Melissa, you know, as you're talking about belief and suggestibility and how fundamental and powerful they are, would you tell us a little bit of just a tiny bit of Hypnosis 101 for the uninitiated, talking about how all hypnosis is self-hypnosis and the power of self-talk?
Well, so, you know, if you think about hypnosis as a state that we are going in and out of all the time, it's just a matter of degree. The brain is going in and out of certain, you know, patterns, and we go in and out of suggestibility. Then we are almost always in some type of trance state. You know, being here now is the hard thing, right? Being fully conscious and focused. You know, and on some level, Dan, even though we do tell our clients that all hypnosis is self-hypnosis and that they are the ones running this show when we do our trance work, the truth is I don't really believe that. I think we are being hypnotized and manipulated constantly from all angles. I think we've learned enough about priming and how even advertising executives will utilize, you know, the latest and greatest coming out of the neuroscience laboratories to manipulate us, to get us to buy, to get us to behave in a certain way. So on some level, we can look at that as getting in there under the radar and working with our unconscious systems, which is what they are. They're banking on our unconscious heuristics and things like that. But I'll move away from that and say our constant, what we imagine all the time, what we visualize, the things we say to ourselves, anything done with repetition, felt with repetition, even thought with repetition becomes a habituated pattern in the brain, you know, because as you know, neurons that fire together wire together, and we kind of have all heard that catchphrase, but really understand what it means, because you don't necessarily have to be physically doing something in order for those neurons to fire together. You could just be thinking about it. So if you're thinking about getting scared on a plane because you were scared on a plane once, each time you think about it, you're strengthening the synaptic connections. You're creating a neural network. So our everyday hypnosis are the habituated patterns that we are almost always operating under. You know, when you start to think about that. So our job as hypnotists on many levels is to dehypnotize people from the negative trances they're in and provide a better trance. You know, so we teach people how to do it more strategically and, you know, with intention. So that it's not just a kind of willy-nilly, you know, constant barrage to your own unconscious mind. We start to guide people into how to program their unconscious mind in a direction that's useful. So I don't know if, I mean, I could go further, but I'm recognizing that we have 5 minutes till 9, so I don't necessarily want to spend so much time going into a Hypnosis 101. If it's useful, I'm happy to do that. But I think people are on this call because they're fascinated by, you know, beyond Hypnosis 101.
Yes, indeed.
Into the past life regression. And, you know, one of the things I will say that's very interesting, because many practitioners, and I'm sure some of the great speakers who are going to be on this series, they've been doing past life regression for many years. They've seen transformations like that. you know, that how can we explain it any other way? And one of the things that I've been thinking about, because I read in the description for this talk that you were like the neuroscience behind past life regression. And I'm like, Dan, the neuroscience behind past life regression, how am I going to, what? And so I think about it.
Don't you have that data?
Yes, Melissa will be talking about the neuroscience behind past life regression. And I'm like, shit, am I? How can I talk about that? So I've been thinking about it. And I know, obviously, I teach the neuroscience behind regression, behind re-imprinting, behind how we in our office can see someone with a phobia or anxiety that they've had for 30 years all of a sudden change. And what explains that neuroscientifically is the act of memory reconsolidation. It's that every time you remember something, as we said earlier, it's an active process. But one thing I didn't really stress, which needs to be stressed, is every time you recall a memory, it's as if you lift it out of the brain. It becomes malleable again. And you've got a window, research indicates, of about 6 hours for that memory to get reconsolidated back into the brain. But while it's up, it's malleable. And that's why we can put comfort or, you know, confidence where there wasn't. And once it's integrated down, then the whole neural network that had been connected to that, regardless of the early implicit learning in childhood primes, whatever it was, gets affected. So because so much of memory is a narrative we make up that has its foundations in the early implicit pre-verbal emotional memories, and that we know the brain likes to weave a story. So whether it's weaving a story of something that happened when I'm 2, or weaving something far more elaborate that also overlaps with the metaphors of mind that we were talking about earlier, and that you mentioned in your, you know, intro, that have resonance and relevance to our lives today. So overlapping early implicit emotional learning, and then building a narrative around that kind of overlaps with the symbolism that is relevant to us today and things that we need to explore, or whether it's just resonating, and here's where I'm going to once again widen it out, whether it's just resonating with that particular life story that holds the most meaning. So what if the reason you had that experience of being that woman on the plains, what if it was real, but it, you know, what resonates with what's going on in your life today is going to resonate with a past life memory, and pluck the one out of 50,000, 100,000, who, you know, who knows how many lives. And so there's that possibility too. I felt like I was diving a little too much into the neuroscience and maybe explaining it in a way that takes some of the magic out, when I don't mean to do that, because I don't want to do that for myself either. Because if it's all happening now, then why wouldn't you pick the most relevant metaphoric symbolic life to experience now in order to learn something, in order to grow or transcend? So I think understanding how memories are malleable and how they're connected by, you know, networks, and that by making a change in any one of the pieces, it affects the whole network. So I don't know if that helped.
I think it does.
I don't even remember if I was answering a question.
The neuroscience of past life regression, I think, is at the intersection of memory reconsolidation and priming, filtering, you know, things like this, embedded in the meta pattern even. Yeah, in the curating that happens neurologically, is I remember what I had for breakfast this morning, or, you know, anything in the past.
The curating. You're
Curious.
such a poet. It's so
Oh,
true.
shucks.
So there is Henrietta.
Yes. So if we want to enter into Q&A with our guests,
Sure.
Henrietta, please feel free to
Sure.
pose some questions.
I will. Well, first of all, big thank you, Melissa and Dan. That was fantastic. I'm going to be running down to West 29th Street very fast. No,
Me
seriously.
too.
No, really fascinating what you'd said. Really resonated with me. I loved how you both talked about the function of memory, and the malleability of reality. It's funny because years ago I did this play where the key, a theatre piece, performance piece, that was the key was that all the characters was anything you can imagine is real. That was the main kind of line that was on that, which is of course, you know, in a lot of creative work. But the fact that you're talking about this in terms of sort of trauma and how we see ourselves, phobias, that was really interesting. Like how that can be addressed. I mean, I don't know if either of you know this. I've read a lot of Jodorowsky's healing methods. He's got these. He devised a healing called psychomagic.
Oh,
I'm familiar.
Yeah.
And then metagenealogy, when you were talking about this new discovery, and you know how trauma is passed through generations.
Yeah, through epigenetics.
Yeah, and sort of like there seems to be a lot of new, or kind of maybe not so new, but healing techniques that are coming, you know, into sort of the mainstream around those subjects, right?
Well, what's interesting, Henrietta, is that so many of the ancient healing techniques are kind of getting a revival, and as more and more research comes out, you know, indicating the primacy of mind in matter, and you know that even when, you know, when I was teaching workshops even 10 years ago, 15 years ago at Beth Israel, and I would mention the mind-body connection, there was still some old stodgy, you know, and it would be like, now there's no question. I mean, psychoneuroimmunology is a field, and epigenetics, and whether we turn on or turn off gene expression, relies on perception and our environment. And not just the environment, but our belief about the environment has the ability to change the expression of genes. So science is starting to back up what these old mystics have been saying. And I'm sure you know the quote that the scientists climbed the mountain and they found the mystics waiting there for them.
Yep.
And it really is the case. So a lot of times these old techniques are being resurrected and looked at with a slightly different eye.
Yeah, totally. And I just, before I'm going to get to everyone's questions, but I did my own personal experience in Mexico with some, you know, kind of more ancient healers, shall we say. I sort of experienced my grandparents and their parents kind of out of my trancey state. The first time in my life, and then all these funny other symbolic things happen. So I've sort of been being led into these areas just naturally, which is really interesting about what you're talking about. So okay, I'm going to get to some people's questions because I could talk to you for hours, and that's okay. So
Dan and I are lucky because we're in the same space, so we can talk to each other.
Yeah.
No, seriously.
And we do.
Why I do what I do, really. Yeah. My husband was correct. It's fun stuff.
Oh, it is. The whole premise of psychomagic is because Jodorowsky, like myself, has been in theatrical sort of scenarios many times, is that he prescribes his clients acts to break them out of their, you know, habits, habitual kind of, that are holding them back or causing them suffering.
Like
you know,
a psychodrama.
Yeah, exactly. But they sometimes they can seem kind of bizarre or outlandish, like, oh my God, I'd never do that. But you know, he prescribes them based on a deep knowledge of or should I say experience. So
Mm.
anyway,
Yes.
that's interesting to me, because that's
Mm-hmm.
a bit of a very profound experiential healing technique.
Mm.
Okay, so I'm going to get to, let's see, I'm going to go to the top of the Q&A box. Sorry, sometimes I have to drag this cursor down. Oh, sorry.
It's okay. You want me to click on it?
It's sometimes I'm stuck on the somebody who's having technical problems, and I want to get to the middle of the Q&A box. Here we go.
I see one question about Ben. Ben is asking, have either of you experienced going to a past life experience to heal a current life experience, such as fear of fires?
That's a good one. Let's
Yeah,
start with that. Yeah.
I can speak to that. Actually, I have. I had one session maybe 3 years ago, which was a very impactful session for me, where I did a past life regression with a woman who may have been in her 50s at the time, early 50s, maybe late 40s. And for the record, the way I approach my practice, and as I offer hypnosis and regression therapy, if somebody comes to me with a phobia, my first thought is hypnosis, to offer them a pattern interrupt that they can use to apply resources, feelings of being safe and in control when confronting whatever those old triggers of the phobia may have been. But this person really wanted to do a past life regression. And I saw no reason not to. She was very interested in doing it, and she seemed 100% stable and capable of having the experience safely. So I said, okay, let's do it. So we began a past life regression where in the first scene, she experienced a scene as a young boy walking through Victorian London with his mother, and they come across a burning building with people falling out to their death, this horrible traumatic scene. And she's re-experiencing this as a little boy. And as she's sitting in the chair, she's having a cathartic emotional experience. She's safe, she's comfortable, she is dissociated enough that she understands that this scene is not happening to her in the present, but she is re-experiencing these feelings. As she's experiencing this, I ask her the question, do we need to hold on to this suffering? Are you ready to let it go? I receive yes and yes and yes, and we begin that process of letting it go. And in the next scene, she experiences a narrative as a serving maid in a beautiful European home, probably, again, somewhere in or around the Victorian age. And she put her arm into an oven, and the oven set fire to her arm. The fire goes up her shoulder. She's badly burned. And before she's given any kind of medical attention, the fire does get put out, but she's scolded and berated by the rest of the staff and the people there. So she has this second experience where she is reliving, perhaps, the experience of this fire. Again, I ask her the questions. What is the highest, most positive use of this experience? Are you ready to let go of the suffering? Do you need this any longer in your life? Is it okay for you to feel in control when confronted with fire? I receive positive and affirmative answers. We continue. So I think we closed that session with a spirit guide exercise, which we'll talk a little bit more about later in the series, but helping her conclude and understand and integrate safely and comfortably this narrative, this new awareness, this new knowledge, without any kind of abreaction, and everything seemed to go absolutely fine. So about a week later, I received an email from her. I followed up with her just to ask how she was feeling. She emailed me back saying that she was sitting next to her fireplace in her home in New Jersey, and while fire wasn't her favorite thing in the world, she no longer felt that it controlled her. And we did, now that I'm remembering, during that session, do a little bit of present-based hypnosis of her in a open, relaxed state of awareness in her mind, lighting matches and blowing them out, lighting matches and blowing them out, reinforcing that she was in control of fire. So, I reflect on this session a lot because it was one session, which not every session is going to be like this, but regression therapy and hypnosis do, again, all the magical thinking and the stories and this works in the positive and the negative, because again, as Melissa was mentioning earlier, smoking cessation is among my least favorite things to work with as a hypnotist, because there's usually some level of magical thinking at play. Like they're going to walk in and have this thing taken out of them or something like this. But here we were. This was one session, and this woman really did experience a powerful and authentic shift that she was ready for.
Yes.
I also reflected on her more than anything else, and her strength. I don't claim to know how this works. I think this area is where the magic is. It's where it resides. And that something came through in the narrative for her where this phobia, this thing she had lived with, the story of it completely shifted. And now she was on top of it. She was in control of it. And having a sense of its origin, having a sense of where it came from, all of a sudden it being a linear narrative that she was in control of, created a powerful enough shift for her that now she was completely, had a different relationship to fire.
Yeah, I mean, there can't be a bigger ritual than that,
Yeah.
Yeah. Lily has said that, commented below that question, that the life we see in regression is what is currently going on in our life. So, I mean,
that resonates with, right,
with what you were just talking about. I mean, then that,
Yes, it ties back always. One of the constant questions I'm asking in past life regression is, how does this connect to your present life? What do you see or feel in this scene that connects to your present? Pose this question to your higher mind. What is the lesson here? What is the resource that we can bring back with us? I sometimes say among the highest compliments you can give a past life regression is that it's useful.
yeah.
These experiences can be so out there and can be so weird, beautifully so, but keeping it grounded, keeping it centered in something, keeping it focused, the intention of the experience, as we know, is essential. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Shall I move on to another one, or did you want? Yeah.
You can move on.
Yeah. So Nanette here says, I'd like to ask how this connects to out-of-body experiences and or near-death experiences.
Well, I can speak a little bit to that. A lot of people in various trance states will have an experience of a feeling of kind of transcending the body, right? There's even one of my platform states that I like to bring people to is that of an expanded awareness set, where I suggest their mind is expanding outward. There's certain things that we know we can trigger the feeling and the perspective of out-of-body experiences by using, by stimulating different regions of the brain. So we do know that the brain seems to be in some weird way hardwired to have this experience. As far as the, near death and things like that, people will have, there's a big contingency of people that focus on life between life. So live between live therapy is where you go through a kind of past life regression, and it's really, the goal is to get to the in-between lives where you can learn more, where you can. So that would be similar to some in that kind of near-death experience where people will report going through tunnels and going through lights and just being in this expanded state of knowing, of transcending lives. But as far as, you know, I mean, in my office, certainly there's never been someone who could in any way misconstrue what we were doing as a near-death experience. You know, this is New York City, and that's fucking scary to people. You know what I mean? Like, there's no tunnels of light that I would ever suggest, because we all have that metaphor in mind. We've all seen and we've all read, and so it's in there. So I would never suggest that. So I'm a little, like I said, I'm a little overly cautious. It's that Woody Allen mentality of mine that I would just want to be overly protective of my clients at all costs. So as far as out of body, that can sometimes happen or be reported spontaneously to certain people who are very good at trance. They don't even know they're good at trance until they do trance, and then all of a sudden we've got someone who's, you know, who's a what we call a deep trance subject. And a lot of times for those people, they'll have what feels like an out-of-body experience. I don't know if that answers.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask if Michelle, if you're out there, did you want to come on camera and mic and share your thoughts with us? I'm happy to pass them on, but Michelle quite often likes to come on the mic, but I'm not sure. I'm not hearing from her. So Michelle, if it's okay with you, I'm going to go ahead and just share what she'd written.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah. So Michelle said, I've had a few experiences. Hang on, is this her?
She says, I'm here.
Oh, good. Great. Faye, if you're out there, can you get Michelle? You have to allow her to come on as she is.
Let's see. Hold on.
Here you are.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for this topic. I think it's one that kind of transcends several different fields. As a shamanic practitioner, some of my earliest visions were connected to past lives, and they took me by surprise because I had no framework. It wasn't part of my spiritual belief system. But I was in Egypt and was very agitated, almost seeing a holographic superimposed past and present experience, and was very silent about it because I was with my mother and her best friend, and that was not their cup of tea. But I have found in my own work as a medium that past life comes up very frequently, and trying to learn how to navigate the symbolism of how to integrate those lessons from a karmic reincarnation perspective, and what those lessons can be in our modern light, our current incarnation, have been an interesting road for me. And I kind of have approached it from a quantum physics perspective, that we have a space-time fabric that some of us learn how to fold. And, I think that we have the power to learn lots of things if you go in with an open mind. So I'm really, really fascinated by this topic, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
And
I like
I
that.
can get over my fear of being burned at the stake, because that was some of my other past life recall, and really being able to instantaneously see several successive lifetimes of being burned at the stake and coming back as an inquisitor, and performing that on other people, and seeing the karmic ties that I had with people that were in my life now who were expecting retribution for this cycle that we had gotten locked in, and realizing that I had moved to a point of not seeking that in this lifetime. But I do not like being in saunas or sweat lodges. So didn't really think it was something that I needed to deal with, but maybe it's something that will lead me to some regression therapy to sort that out. But thank you, and I look forward to the next 5 weeks.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
I really liked I like the idea of folding space-time.
I think that as we continue to...
Whoops.
Oh,
we lost her.
I know that Michelle she's somewhere quite remote, and she might have been running off to tent.
Sorry.
Okay. There we go.
Sorry. I think that as we continue to push the understanding of quantum physics and where consciousness may or may not reside, I'm married to a microbiologist, and so epigenetics is something that we have come to understand.
Morphogenetic fields.
He believes that DNA is a program that's beamed in, and he's actually a legit scientist.
Well, can I just, if you're talking about kind of like the non-local quantum aspects, then it's not even necessarily having to fold space. That still implies moving from one to another. That's still, my favorite book when I was a kid was A Wrinkle in Time, and they call that a tesseract, which is, the ability basically to do what you just described, which is to bend space.
Well, and what I've come to understand as a channel that is able to work within that field, that folding happens within us. And, to be a singularity and the whole expanse of the universe at the same time is kind of the beginnings of that doorway into accessing whatever it is that we are ultimately seeking, whether it's past life or multidimensional awareness, or just trying to understand what got us where we are as far as a universe evolving through space-time. So thank you so much.
No, it's all fascinating. It's all part of that cool field that we play.
Yeah, I think I found a new field to study myself. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye, Michelle.
Bye.
Thanks, Michelle.
I love you. I'm so happy to see you.
See you soon.
See you next week. Wow.
Yes.
That's great. Michelle is regularly on, and it's great to hear from her always. Okay, so we haven't got much longer left, so I do want to try and cover. We don't have a lot going on here behind the scenes, but Ben Locos has shared with us that he says, I have a client who is afraid she will hurt herself and obsesses about it. I want to do past life regression with her after doing bilateral stimulation, heart breathing, etc. This will be her third session with me. Any ideas for how to...
Yes, I have ideas.
Oh, great. Okay.
Sorry.
Any ideas for how to see if she hurt herself in a prior life?
Right. So Ben, typically, one of my things is if someone doesn't necessarily, do no harm, right? So if someone is obsessing about hurting themselves, I would tread carefully there. I would first keep it very, bilateral stimulation is a fantastic pattern interrupt to segue out, but unless she's going to do bilateral stimulation every time she starts to have that thought, she's not necessarily going to rewire the brain as it relates to the obsessive thoughts. So I'm going to suggest playing a little bit more in the here and now. I'm going to suggest the meta pattern. I'm going to suggest some tapping, some EFT. And then I'm going to explore maybe, the inner dialogue and ways of slowing that down or manipulating it. The only reason I caution against past life regression here is, you don't want to take someone who is in a precarious state because their mind will give them something and you don't know what that is. Yeah. So if you think of hypnosis as an amplifier, then if she goes in there, you know, I mean, in other words, I know a lot of therapists might think otherwise. They might think, no, you should go and find out the past life where she harmed herself. But, you know, as in any other therapy, sometimes insight and even having a narrative is not enough to fix it. So, you know, people come to me and they come to me after 35 years of traditional therapy. They know better than anyone else, you know, why they're fucked up. It just doesn't stop them from being fucked up. So in the same way, I want you to put this frame there. And, you know, once again, I'm overly cautious. So I don't know, maybe Dan might have something else to offer, but I would say, you know, work with the pattern interrupts, reread, you know, the anti-anxiety toolkit of mine, and give her all of those with the idea coming from Jeffrey Schwartz of how to rewire the habituated pattern of obsessiveness. And so that would be crucial before you go exploring. That's all well and good, but you need to stop her from obsessing on hurting herself before she does.
Yeah, I would defer to you here, Melissa. I know you and Ben have know each other. He's a student of yours, and I imagine, and I absolutely
And a
agree
therapist.
and a therapist. So, yeah, I would need more context before I would be able to say whether or not I would do a past life regression or not. But certainly, if somebody is in a fragile state, then you want to offer them stability, not the opposite. Yeah.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah,
Okay.
Those were great.
And thanks, Ben, for punching in these questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Ben.
Yeah, that was a great question, because that's a real kind of insight into your therapeutic process. And I really like how you approach with caution. Just people who are diving into very radical techniques at the moment in other fields.
Sure.
It, to me, seems a little like, wait a minute, you know, we're not indigenous people living in rainforests. We're
right.
Anyway, so
dropping some ayahuasca and freaking out. Yeah,
I know. We don't know what realms we're really dealing with, like you were saying, you know, other.
Yeah. Well, and there's concrete, very proven ways to stop OCD thoughts, and you want to utilize all the tools at our disposal, and certainly teaching someone to be able to break out of habituated patterns. I mean, that's kind of the crux of my work. So that takes precedence, you know, and then when in a better state, we can explore, and it might be fascinating.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good approach. That makes sense. So let's see, there's one other question here from Matt, who says, this may have been covered, I was gone for a bit, but Matt, no, it hasn't actually. Have either of you done past life regression on yourselves through self-hypnosis, or was it always led by another?
I have experimented before with recording my own voice on my phone, leading regressions and such, and listened to them myself and had my own experiences. I was doing this for professional as much as anything else. I'm getting a bit of an echo in my voice.
Yeah, a little bit, but we can still hear you well enough to understand it. Yeah.
I will say that I played in. Wow, I'm getting. Hold on. Yeah, much better. I've played different altered states, the Monroe Institute, and then just on my own exploring the things like that. I've had glimpses, but it's not really a thorough experience in the way that you know, like Dan would lead you through. You know, it's not. It's too elusive when you're on your own. It's usually better to have an external guide. That's just my experience. And I'm getting such a bizarre feedback echo that I got up.
Maybe we're being indicated that
Yes, maybe that's the extraterrestrials that didn't like to exist.
Yeah, it's like, or something's going like, hey, it's 9:30, guys, because me going like, wow, it's like crazy. So, I mean, if you're, we did, oh, hang on, there one more question. Have either of you used past life to reach higher self?
I can speak to that. I am almost inclined to say that, Ben, you and I might have a separate chat or something just to mitigate against the echo that's happening, but I'm not hearing it anymore.
Yeah, so it sounds a little better.
Okay, great. I have, yes, Ben, and I use higher self metaphorically as well in past life regression. I'll often ask the question, or I rather give the suggestion to the client that I'm working with, posing this question to your own higher mind inside your mind. What is the lesson here?
Yeah.
What is the resource we're looking for? How does this connect to the present for you? And I also think spirit guide exercises, which I'm a big proponent of myself. And again, we'll be talking about that more as the series goes on, that spirit guides are also a way of accessing higher self, that there are numerous techniques and methods within regression therapy for embodying and providing a mouthpiece for what we will just colloquially call intuition, or, you know, our deeper sense of what we know to be true, our authenticity, our higher self, what have you. So yeah, in past life regression, I'm often invoking and suggesting that the client dialogue with their own higher self, often in the privacy of their own mind. I really don't know, or I don't really need to know the content of the conversation unless it's of some import or will help me guide the session further. But that information can really just be for the client and is for the client, that dialogue. And I also, of course, suggest that that be an ongoing dialogue. It certainly doesn't have to end in my office, but can continue.
Yeah. And just to, you know, on some level, it's almost implied, right? So, you know, by taking people through these different experiences, certainly going into an expanded awareness, life between lives, this kind of space. I mean, it is implied that you are experiencing, that you are more than this life or this life or this life. You know, it's kind of in this expanded state that we're exploring, you know, when you choose a life to revisit, then who's doing the choosing? You know, so at a certain point, it's almost implied. I mean, unless you have a definition of higher self that's slightly different than what I'm thinking, I would say it's, you know, it kind of shows up. So we have, you know, the wise advocate exercise where it's an external mouthpiece of that higher self, or you have spirit guides that you know. So I think then it's just a matter of what terminology we're using, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's sort of like, yeah, and sort of those archetypes will appear, right? Aspects of the collective psyche, which are helpful to understand behaviors and patterns and relationships. Yeah. Okay, guys. Well, we've covered the questions.
All right, excellent.
Terrific.
Just run over 5 minutes, so thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Henrietta.
Yeah, that was really a fantastic first session. Thanks, Dan, and thank you so much, Melissa.
Oh, my pleasure. It's always fun.
To know that you're there on 29th Street.
Well,
Please.
you know, my website is just my name, so melissatiers.com. You know, that gives you the address, my number. Just give me a call if you want to stop by.
I totally do. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. Okay. Well, wonderful. And we'll look forward to seeing you again next week, Dan.
Yes, absolutely. Next week, we'll be picking up with Sadek Bazara and talking about visuals, creativity, symbology, and diving deeper into metaphors in the mind during past life regression, examining perspectives of Jungian archetypal journeys, collective consciousness, things like this. So I look forward to continuing next Tuesday night.
Fantastic.
All right. Sounds awesome.
Great. And Ben, I just saw your question, so I'll email you and Dan and connect you. Okay.
Terrific. Terrific.
Okay.
And thank you, Melissa.
My pleasure, Ani.
All right.
I'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good night.
Thanks for coming, everybody. We'll see you
Thank
soon.
you, everyone. Yeah. Good night.
Now we just have to figure out how to get out of here. There we go.
I think there's a leave meeting button on the bottom right there.